10:01, so I'll call the Tuesday, March 14th, 2023 regular meeting of the Clatsop County Planning Commission to order. And if you'll all rise and take part in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If we may have a roll call.
Chair Farrar.
Present.
Vice Chair Powers.
Here.
Commissioner Magyar.
Here.
Commissioner Pritchard.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Linder.
Here.
Commissioner Craftshower.
I'm here.
Thank you.
I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Been moved to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No additions, so we'll go with the agenda as presented. And business from the public, I don't see anybody here in the room from the public. And is there anyone online that wishes to comment? Have we heard from?
I have not.
I see one other name on there, and I'm not sure if. Well, at any rate, this is the point in our regular meetings where we allow public comment for land use issues in the county, and you're given a time limit of 3 minutes to make a statement. So if anybody's online there, please just unmute your mic and let me know. Otherwise, we'll go forward. Seeing none or hearing none, let's get on with the work session.
Okay. So Clancy, if you could pull up the presentation, please. Okay. And if you could go back to the beginning, please. Thank you. And
Do I need to scroll for you?
may need to. It looks like our battery's dead. All right. So today, I wanted to start a discussion with the Planning Commission about housing, and today is really just going to focus on providing information about Goal 10, how the statewide planning system works, some of what our parameters are as an unincorporated area versus the city's requirements and responsibilities, and to talk about some of the ongoing actions that are happening both at the state level and the county level, talk about some of our past initiatives, and then just set the stage for April, when I would like us all to come back with some additional questions and some initial thoughts as we start going through the zoning code and looking where we can find opportunities to help streamline processes or identify barriers or just find areas where we might be able to incorporate additional opportunities for housing. So today is really just background information, and as I'm going through the presentation at any time, if you have questions, please don't save them to the end. Please feel free to just ask questions as they occur. For the record, my name is Gail Henriksen. I'm the Community Development Director. And we're going to start out with Goal 10. So Goal 10 in our statewide planning goals and our land use planning system deals exclusively with housing. And its only goal is to provide for the housing needs of the citizens of the state, which sounds much easier apparently than it is in reality, as we're finding out. So when it comes to Goal 10 and many of the other goals in the statewide system, for example, Goal 6, which deals with air, water, and land resources quality, Goal 11, which deals with public facilities, and Goal 14, which deals with urbanization. The whole reason the statewide planning system is set up the way it is to really direct more dense growth into incorporated areas and within the urban growth boundaries. And so as a rural, unincorporated area, our role in providing a lot of services or providing needed housing gets scaled back. And so it's not directly on Clatsop County to provide all the needed housing. It's not only on us to solve the housing issue. We have a role to play, and we'll talk about that more as we go through these slides. But if we were a city, we would be required, let me say a city of a certain size, over 10,000, we would have to have a buildable lands inventory. We'd have to do a housing needs analysis to do a 20-year lookout to see what kind of housing we needed, where we were going to put it, what lands we had available, and then come up with a strategy to produce that housing. But because we are not a city, we don't have those requirements. So we are kind of free to, we have a lot more latitude in that way, and that we're not bound by these deadlines and requirements. As we talked about, most of our dense growth is going to be directed into the 5 cities here within the county. And our role primarily is going to be one of assisting the cities in helping them process their urban growth boundary amendments, providing support to them. If possible, there may be financial contributions that we can make or assistance that we can lend. We have surplus property that we'll talk about in a little bit that can be also given to cities for certain specific purposes. And so Goal 10 gets implemented through Oregon administrative roles, and I've listed those up there in case anybody has some time and wants to go through and see the specifics of how housing works here in the state. Next slide, please. So right now, if you've listened to the news at all over the past couple of months since the legislative session started and our governor took office in January, there is a lot of activity on the housing front right now. Governor Kotak, during her first couple days in office, signed 3 executive orders. First of all, Executive Order 2302, which declared a state of emergency due to the homeless situation in the state. Executive Order 2303, which basically had the governor direct the state agencies to find ways to expand low barrier shelters. So those are ones where you do not necessarily have to be sober or clean to come into, but that will just allow you to come in as you need to be sheltered at any point. It requires state agencies to start focusing on ways to prevent homelessness, and requires them to, through their processes and procedures, to prioritize prevention and reduction of homelessness. And then Executive Order 2304 is the one I think that probably gets the most news coverage these days. This is the one where the governor has set the goal of building 36,000 new housing units a year over the next 20 years to address both underproduction historically in the state and to address the needed housing that we're going to need over the next 20 years to accommodate incoming residents and new people that are here in our state. It also establishes a Housing Production Advisory Council, which had their first meeting, I think, either on Friday or last week or Monday this week. And the Housing Advisory Council is tasked with developing an action plan of how we're going to get to the point of building 36,000 units per year. And that plan has to be finalized and presented to the governor by the end of this year. Next slide, please. So kind of hand in hand with the governor's executive orders, the legislature this year is considering several housing bills. I've only put 2 up here on the screen because I think they are gathering some of the most publicity and attention. But in the director's report that accompanies your agenda today, there are a lot of different housing bills that are addressed in there, and we can go through those later when we get to that point in the agenda. But House Bill 2001 is the big omnibus housing package that is out there, and it would basically set up a system where Oregon Housing and Community Services, in partnership with DLCD, and Department of Administrative Services, is going to do this annual housing needs analysis and start looking at what we have produced, where we are lacking, which jurisdictions are keeping up in their required housing units, and then if there are not, if jurisdictions aren't making their effort and not meeting their goals, then there are likely going to be some sort of penalties that will come along with that, and those are not entirely clear yet what those might be. The House Bill 2001 also requires that housing look every year to take a look at how many houses are going to be projected to be converted to vacation rentals or second homes, so really not available for long-term housing of residents. And it also looks at how many housing units we're going to have to meet the needs of the homeless that are here in the state as well. So it is a very large package. It covers a lot more than that, that is related to housing, but not necessarily to land use, which is what we want to focus on. It's over 100 pages, but if you do have time to go through it, I would highly recommend it. It really is interesting what all the things that are being proposed in terms of housing and incentives and homeless housing and everything else that goes with it.
Can you just give me a concise definition of unsheltered versus homeless?
The unsheltered homeless, and I forget if it's where I read the definition, it's in some piece of legislation, but it is basically people who are living in places that were not meant to be habitated. So cars, doorways, tents, that type of thing. So if you are in a shelter, you may be homeless, but you are not necessarily unsheltered. But if you are living in your car, you are an unsheltered homeless person.
Okay, thank you.
One of the other pieces of legislation that's working its way through the legislature right now is Senate Bill 1013. And this one would require counties to allow people to place an RV on their property in order to allow people to live there permanently. And there are some rules that are prerequisites that have to be met. There has to be a primary house already on the property. That house has to be owner occupied. You cannot rent out the house to anybody else. And the property owner is responsible for making sure that the RV is connected to essential utilities, which is water, septic or sewer, and electric. There are a lot of concerns, at least with the planning folk around the state. We deal with this a lot in terms of code compliance, and it can be a very unsafe situation because most of these RVs typically only have one entrance and exit. They are made of materials that are not maybe the healthiest. They are prone to fire, as we recently saw again at Sunset RV Park a couple weeks ago, where they had an RV that burned to the ground. We find that people are cutting fireplaces and wood-burning stoves into their RVs, and they're not covered by building codes, so there's really no way to inspect or regulate them. So there are a lot of health safety concerns associated with this. It looks like it has a lot of traction in the legislature, so there's a very good possibility that it is going to move forward and become law. And then we will have to be doing some updates to our zoning code to address this. And so I just wanted to make you aware of that, Bill.
Just a question in reference to that. If for those homeowners associations that may be in unincorporated areas that have restrictions against RVs, if this legislature should pass, is there a conflict there, or would the legislature override the CCNR?
That's a very good question, and I don't know with 100% certainty the answer to that. I know with regard to the county's rules, the homeowners associations can be more stringent. So I will follow up with county council on that one and see if I can get an answer for you. Okay. All right. Any other questions about these two pieces? Okay. So then, to talk about some of the things that are happening more at the local level, you've probably seen recently over the past couple weeks, the county received grant funding, $2.8 million to purchase the Columbia Inn just down here on Marine Drive. And the county will be converting those 22 hotel rooms into transitional living spaces for up to 44 people. Right now, the county has closed on the property. We are temporarily letting residents from the Helping Hands home live there. Helping Hands house, also on Marine Drive, had a water leak, and so while they're doing their repairs there temporarily, residents have moved to the Columbia Inn. But the goal is to have the Columbia Inn up and running for transitional housing within 45 to 60 days. And so there are some improvements that are going to be happening there as well. Another thing that's going on, this is a little bit more than local, this is actually at the state level, but the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which we used to call the Regional Housing Needs Analysis. This is moving forward, well, it was completed in 2021, and it basically broke the state into regions and then further broke those regions down by city and identified how many housing units each city would need to construct in order to address past underproduction and future need. And so here in Clatsop County, Astoria was projected to need 818 units. Cannon Beach had 194 units. Gerhardt, 135 units. Seaside, 756. And Warrenton with just over 1,100. So you can see that we have quite a need for housing of all price points and types. So it's not just low income, 30% of your income or less housing. It's all the way up to people who are earning 120% or more of area median income. It's single family, it's multifamily, it's duplexes. So it covers all the different housing products and all the different price points within those housing products. Kind of tied into that is this Clatsop Regional Housing Task Force, and we started meeting back in October. And the task force came about, Jeff Adams, who was the Cannon Beach Community Development Director, picked up on this idea at a May meeting of the elected officials in 2022 and decided to run with it. And so he set up our first meeting in October. We conducted a housing forum back in November. We just had a housing funding forum yesterday down in Seaside. And the whole purpose of this is to bring together staff from around the county, the elected officials, the administrators, and major employers. So we have schools, we have the hospitals represented. I'm trying to think who else is there. We have some housing developers who come on a regular basis. But to really identify where we have funding, and Cannon Beach does have an excise tax, and they have funding available, put aside for housing construction, to identify where there's land, which is where the county can help play a role, and to identify who the players are, where the funding gaps are, how do we make sure housing units stay affordable in perpetuity, and to really bring all those ideas together in one place so that we can have a program moving forward. Now, Jeff has since moved back to the East Coast and taken a different job, so we'll see how this goes moving forward, but I think there's still momentum behind it, and I think there's a lot of support for it. So we'll have to see what form it takes over the next few months.
A couple of quick questions about what you've just gone over with, primarily with the cities and the number of housing units that they're going to be required to build, or at least be encouraged to build. I guess Astoria is the only one that will be under a requirement of some sort to meet the goal set, because it's over 10,000. But my question is, when you look at the tables, table 1, actually table 2, 3, 4, and so on, and compare them to table 1, where you have the summary figures, I'm wondering, how was the homeless population allocated to the 5 different cities? Was that just based on a sort of percentage of total population and then proportioning it out, or was it actually by where the particular homeless people tend to reside at the present time? Do you know how that was come up with?
You know, I don't know. I have made a note of that, and it looks like I had a footnote there that I did not copy over when I copied this out of Goal 10, so I'll have to go back and check that.
And then, in the same vein, I wonder with the underproduction that's given as a column in, Table 1, but it's on a regional basis, there's 295 units. Now, I assume that means right now we're 295 below where we should be,
Correct.
but that's over a region. So again, I'm wondering how much of that went to Seaside, how much of that went to Astoria, and so on. And then probably the bulk of it, or a large part of it, probably also went to the other counties, Columbia and Tillamook. And is there another, what's the North Coast consist of? It's our county, Columbia, and
Tillamook.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Lincoln County.
Oh, is Lincoln in there
Yeah.
also?
Mhm.
Okay. So that would be a big chunk outside of our county, and so that the backlog we have in the county is probably, who knows, it might be 70 or 80 out of that number or something. Anyway.
Yeah, and these numbers in Table 1 are actually lower than what the governor's study came up with.
Uh-huh.
She projected a need of underproduction of 140,000, and the numbers that she came up with when she did her executive orders and her emergency declaration.
Okay. The other thing I noticed is that in these tables for the particular cities, they all have basically the same percentages for the type of housing, whether it's single-family, detached, or attached, or manufactured, so on. And also, they have the same percentages, for the most part, by income brackets. And I found that, I mean, maybe that's the best they could do, but it seems like there might be real significant differences between, say, Cannon Beach and Astoria or Seaside. I don't know if there is, but so to what is that going to be refined over time to really look at our county and our cities individually rather than trying to just, you know, proportion it out of a bigger aggregated number?
Yeah, I think part of that answer is going to lie in what the Housing Production Council comes up with in terms of what their plan is to get us to 36,000 units per year. Mm-hmm. And then also as part of House Bill 2001, having that annual analysis. And so that's going to all start occurring at the state level. And I don't know what their process will be or their methodology at this point.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't use similar regions in that analysis, but I more difficult, but it seems like that's kind of a coarse number for us to target, because as far as I can tell, our county is a little bit, especially our cities, are very limited on their buildable lot inventories relative to these kinds of increase in number of units they need to put into to finish. So getting the numbers right, it may seem like I'm picking away at some small things, but in order for us to do what the state wants at our level, I think we need to be more precise if we can. So I don't know if that's going to be input that can be given to this new committee that's taking this new analysis task on. But I certainly would encourage not just giving us a lumped estimate based on Columbia and Lincoln and Tillamook and our own county.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would support that. I mean, since this is a beta version, I'm sure this is a boilerplate, and they threw it together, figure out how they were going to go and the format they were going to go forward with. And I'm anticipating this will be portioned correctly.
Yeah.
I just think it just was put together just to be.
Well, this is helpful for a start anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so moving on then, I think, the Housing Strategies Report that was completed in 2019 and was done in a partnership with the county and the 5 cities is probably locally where we hear the most emphasis placed. And I know the city of Astoria recently has adopted some amendments to their codes in order to start addressing these 10 strategies that were identified in the plan. I think Cannon Beach has done a lot of work on it as well. You'll see on the table here that's up on the screen that the majority of these strategies, because of the way the statewide planning system is set up, are going to be applicable to the cities and not necessarily to the county. And again, that usually deals more with the density issue and the ability for cities to be able to provide services which the county cannot do. But I think there are ways that we can incorporate, maybe to some extent, a lot of these 10 strategies that are up here on the board and on the screen, which is why I wanted to make sure the Planning Commission had them so that you can start thinking about them. And as we move into our discussions in April and May and however long we discuss before we come up with our final set of draft recommendations, to start thinking about how these can be incorporated into the county's zoning code and adapted for rural residential lands. And I don't know if you want me to go item by item through each of those 10 strategies, or if you have questions about those. I hadn't planned on going into detail on each one, but we can certainly if you have questions about them.
Well, just kind of in a more general way, I assume that one of the, well, first of all, a question would be, I know Astoria has a buildable lands inventory. It's maybe a couple years old now, I'm not sure, but do the other 4 cities have similar?
Yes, they do.
Even though they're not required, they did that. And how does that number for each stack up against that other table you showed of the number of units after 20 years that need to be constructed? Are they comparable, or are they short on buildable land?
I don't know the answer to that. I have not read all of those buildable land inventories.
Yeah, because it seems like that's where the county might come in. If I understand Seaside's maybe running short of buildable land and they'd like to expand the urban boundary. I think that's what I've heard. But that's the kind of thing where the county would become involved. Is the land outside the existing urban boundary going to be acceptable for building residential property, residences on? So that's an important part where the county will play a role, I assume.
Yeah, so part of the county's role in an urban growth boundary, either boundary expansion or a boundary adjustment, where you can swap lands out, still keep the same basic acreage, but swap portions out. Both of those have to go through both a city approval process and a county approval process, and we will probably be working on one with Warrenton maybe in the next few months where we're going to do a boundary adjustment. One of the things when you do your buildable lands inventory, you are supposed to look at hazards, so areas that are in the 100-year floodplain, areas that are in geologic hazard overlays are really supposed to be discounted when you're looking at your buildable lands, because Goal 7 says you don't want to encourage people to build in hazard areas. And I forgot where I was going with this, but so I think that's one thing that the cities and the counties can work together on, is looking at areas where buildable lands have been included, for example, in the city of Seaside or the city of Warrenton, but there are a lot of 100-year floodplain areas. And so are those areas truly buildable? And if not, then where are the lands that are unincorporated right now that could be pulled into a growth boundary, and that boundary either adjusted or expanded? Seaside did an expansion in 2017 when they took in the new school site up on the hill there. So they did. That was our last one that we did. All right. And then also as part of the Housing Strategies Report, There were several recommendations about policies to include in the county's comprehensive plan, and these have been addressed in the draft of Goal 10 that I included in the package for today's meeting. And that Goal 10, along with the other goals, will be going to the board tomorrow for a work session, just to look at the revisions that have been made to address whether something is required by state statute or administrative rule, or whether the county has discretion in whether or not to do it. So all of these housing policies will be going before the board tomorrow just for discussion. Because it is a work session, it's not a public hearing, so there is no public input, but it is an opportunity for the board to discuss and for the public to listen to those deliberations. Next slide, please. All right, which brings us back to Goal 10, which we started out is to provide housing for the housing needs of the citizen of the state. And so we talked about our draft going forward, that we put the housing strategies in. Next slide, please. And so really today, like I stated at the beginning of my presentation, I really just wanted to make sure the Planning Commission had a very basic start of a foundation about housing and the programs that are being addressed, the legislation that's under consideration, the steps that are being taken locally and at the state level to address the housing crisis that we're experiencing. I also want to have the board and staff as well is going to be doing this over the next month, but thinking about questions that we have. I know you've raised some good ones today, and starting to think about how the county, knowing that we are not going to be the providers of the most dense housing in Clatsop County, that role is going to fall to the cities, but where can we start changing our code, and what are the steps that we need to take? And you are not expected to have answers today. Today is just a chance to ask questions about the basic stuff. Next month, we will start going through our zoning code. We're going to have more discussion about questions you may have, additional information that you may want to have as we move forward. But today was just really a chance to, again, start laying a foundation and seeing what types of questions that you all had for me and for staff as we move forward. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
So next month would be another work session as we go through, this is great.
Yep.
As we go through the building code. Because I think of urban growth boundaries, but I'm not astute enough to know what else the county has in the way of facilities to encourage this, so I'm looking forward to the building codes.
Yeah, well, I think we missed some slides. But anyway, so just to touch on a few other projects, the county surplus land program, we did issue a request for expressions of interest back in 2022. And then we, under ORS, the local governments are allowed to give surplus property to nonprofit corporations or municipalities for use as either affordable housing, social services, or child care services. And so we did already give 2 pieces of surplus property to the city of Seaside, and we are in the process of formalizing and finalizing a procedure to review future requests for expressions of interest. You may have heard that the county has surplus property in Arch Cape, and that we have had an expression of interest from a local nonprofit who's interested in developing it as workforce housing. And so that is under consideration right now, I guess you could say. So that's another thing that the county has done. We've also have agreed to provide $325,000 over 3 years to the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority to help expand their staffing capacity and to help them hire another staff person that can assist in coordinating between local governments, providing better opportunities, making their processes more efficient.
You know, as I went through this, every time I came across mention of ADUs, I was thinking that we've pretty well done what we can for county jurisdiction properties in terms of making ADUs more allowable. I know the state's looking at perhaps allowing ADUs on some of the resource lands as well, I think, in some of the bills that are before the legislature.
Mhm.
But I know the commission still has one more public hearing before it's official, but it's pretty much a done deal. So in your view, have we done pretty much all we can do relative to ADUs?
As much as we can under state statute. Right now, the current rules still have that 2-acre minimum parcel size. There is a bill that is being considered now that would drop that to a 1/2 acre. So if that becomes, if that's approved, then we, could make that amendment to help increase the number of potential ADUs. But under what we are able to do right now, I think we've hit everything. I mean, we've increased the minimum ADU size to the maximum. We did the same thing for guest houses. We have eliminated parking requirements. And then everything else complies with state statute, so.
And so those ADUs, those count as a unit of home for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So as those start coming into fruition, I assume we'll be tallying those up to, I mean, I don't want to make this seem like I'm trying to run a scorecard here, but it kind of sounds like it's going that way, that we should be showing ourselves as a county as having done due diligence to try to do our part to provide enough homes for everyone, and so that will be all accounted for in some way.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to get credit for providing the opportunity. I think the governor is focused on counting actual certificates of occupancy.
Yeah, so that'll be in the future years that we'll probably start seeing some people take advantage of that ADU option.
And then I guess as every RV becomes a livable unit, I guess in theory, the county could get credit for that.
Well, I'm just trying to think of ways, because my feeling is the cities are a little tight on space. And so the more that you can figure out ways to have a few more homes in the unincorporated areas, it seems like that takes some pressure off of the cities, even though I know the focus is to go for the urbanized areas. Does anybody in the virtual world there want to join into the conversation with any questions or comments? You guys have been pretty quiet. They're off making coffee and eating donuts and... Okay, well, I guess that ends the work session for this morning, but I hope everybody took Gail's forewarning that we have, we can see a lot of stuff coming back to us, and it would help if we're all very well prepared for future discussions on this. And with that, I guess we could move into the status report.
Yeah, so there were just a few changes on this month's report, mainly related to the fact that the comprehensive plan goals 1 through 4, 6 through 14, and 19 are going back to the board for a work session tomorrow. You'll note that goal 5 has been pulled from the process right now, and the reason for that is primarily due to the complexity of goal 5. It took our Citizen Advisory Committee's 6 months of really hard, intense work to go through it, and we probably could have spent 6 years on it. So we're going to pull that one out for now and just proceed with, I guess, some of the easier goals to process. And then depending on what the board's direction is to staff tomorrow, then if they're okay with moving it forward, we would schedule this for a new public hearing with the Planning Commission in May, and then go back to the board with 2 adoption hearings in June. So we'll wait and see what comes out of that.
But the plan on that is that the final comp plan will be much more streamlined. Do I have that right? That you'll basically, for each goal, more or less just have a 1 or 2 page sort of summary and then you'll go right into policies. And the other material that was presented and we all reviewed and went through, that'll be in a separate report that's going to be adopted, or?
Yeah, so the way we originally drafted the goals, we had a long introduction section that gave an overview, looked at historical, current, and future trends, and then went into the goals, objectives, and policies. And what we've done, partly for brevity, is pulled that narrative section, the historical, current, and future trends, and put it into a separate background report that does have to get adopted by reference. We left the brief overview in each goal and then went straight into the policies for each goal. So it does shorten the document. It makes it a little less intimidating if you were to physically or online look at it and not having to scroll through maybe 70 pages of narrative to find out the information that was applicable to your project, which is in the policies. So I think in that respect, it's a good change. We worked with the county manager to go, like I said, policy by policy through every single one of those policies, compared it to statewide planning goals, compared it to the implementing OARs, and then identified what the county was legally required to do under those statutes and regulations and what was discretionary for us. And so we've made those changes, which are on the county's website, so you can see what we've struck through and changed. We presented the clean version to the board with links to the strike-through underlined format. So we'll just see. I haven't heard any feedback from the board members at this time, so we'll see what they have to say tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that was a good change to make, to move out all that historical and other information, because it did make the plan just way too long to be practical. So I like that change, but I like the fact that it'll be held as an official document anyway, because I think that's important for anybody that wants to go and try to understand why a particular policy is in there in the first place. Mm-hmm. So that's good. Thank you.
And I think other than that, there's been some movement at the Arch Cape Deli. So they are got some new permits issued, and so hopefully they will be moving forward, and maybe one day we'll actually complete the project. And let's see, our legislative amendments that we did were approved by the board, and that ordinance will go into effect now on March 24th. And the child care and the rural ADUs will be going to a second reading with the board on March 22nd. And the commercial trucking, right now we've pulled from the board agenda simply because of some staffing issues, and so that will move forward, but we just haven't picked a new date for it yet.
Okay, so I guess we'll move on to the director's report.
Yeah, for the director's report, there really were no changes from last month. I updated the list of legislation. The county does track a lot of legislation, and so I pulled out the relative land use ones and what we've internally sort of classified as high priority, medium, and low priority bills. This is not an all-inclusive list by any means. There are so many pieces of legislation out there that it's impossible to really keep track of unless that's your full-time paid position. But it gives you an idea of what is floating out there. There are a lot, as I said, changes and bills proposed around housing. Senate Bill 847, for example, would freeze property taxes if you build an accessory dwelling unit on your property. It would freeze your taxes for 5 years. So that is out there. Some of the bills would circumvent the local land use variance process, which I think is a little bit concerning, in order to promote, I think it was industrial development. But there are just so many bills out there. So if there's any one in particular you would like some more information on or have questions on, I'm happy to answer those to the best of my ability.
does the state system have some kind of, software where you can put in what, you identify this table as a session tracker. Is there actually something where you can say, I'm interested in these issues, and it'll just pull those out of the total package of Senate bills and House bills for you?
If there is, I have not spent enough time poking around to find it, so I don't know.
So this, you actually have to go through line by line, or bill by bill, and...
So the way we work in the county, we have a lobbying firm, PacWest Lobbying, and they track the legislation based on the board's identified priorities in the strategic plan. Internally, most of the departments work with Association of Oregon Counties, and so, for example, I'm a member of the Planning Directors Group, and internally we have kind of our own land use list going on, where we're tracking things a little bit more closely that may not be top priority for our boards, but may have impact on the county overall. So there's a lot of different ways to track it. You can sign up for a legislative tracker emails, where you can get emails when certain committees are meeting or when certain bills are scheduled for hearings. I would only recommend doing that if you really, really want to know, because you will be inundated with emails. It's incredible. I mean, I probably get 100 a day.
Oh.
This is Commissioner Pritchard. There actually is something you can use, it's called Oregon Legislative Information Systems. And so you can actually go in there and put in, if you knew the bill number, of course you can put that in, but you can go by bill text and search, for instance, land use, and it's going to pull up every Senate bill and every House bill that has the word land use in it. Or, but if you just type in housing, you're going to get, all kinds of other stuff that has housing, noted as a word in it. So there's definitely some good tools, but it, as Gail had said, it can get pretty overwhelming, and there's thousands of bills. So it just depends on what you're looking for.
That's good to know, Katie, because I didn't know you could search an OLIS like that, so.
Yeah, there's actually, next to the bill number, you can hit bill text or bill sponsor, and the bill text is really useful in that, when I'm looking for, like even ADUs. While we were talking, I was searching, additional dwelling units. I was searching ADU, kind of just looking, and it was, of course, very big because the letters ADU come up in other things. But you can do an advanced search also and dial it in, but I was getting distracted and didn't want to keep looking because I was enjoying the presentation.
Thank you. Okay, and then I guess on the director's report too, just a reminder, April 5th at 10 o'clock, we're doing our joint meeting with the board. It will be virtual only. And the first part of the meeting is to go over ethics training, which will be led by our county council. And then the second part of the meeting will be to go over the community development, specifically the land use planning work plan for fiscal year 23-24. And what we're hoping to get is some input and direction from, the Planning Commission and the board working together about what you would like us to prioritize over the fiscal year for our work program. So that we as staff are putting our efforts into the areas that you both want to see action on. So, and then at our April meeting, in addition to our continued housing discussion, we're going to have a presentation from ODOT about their transportation management plan update.
Okay. I guess we all know where we're headed now, and unless anybody else has a final comment or question or good of the order. I'm not seeing any raised hands or hearing any voices. So I will adjourn the meeting at about, I'm not sure what time it is now with that.
About 10:50.
10:50.
10:50. Thank you.